This video is made possible by Napleton Subaru in Schaumburg. If you're looking for a new Subaru product in the Chicagoland area, Napleton Subaru in Schaumburg is the best place to buy. Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 2000 Buick Century Limited. Up front is a 3.1 liter V6, and down below is a 4-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Buick Century for two reasons. First of all, it's a very clean example, and you're starting to see these less and less on the streets as time goes on. The second reason is that I've actually reviewed a 2000 Buick Century here on the channel before in this same paint color. However, that was, 5 or 6 years ago. It's been a long time, and I don't feel like I did that car too much justice in that video. And so today, I have a lot more experience. I've driven over 1,000 vehicles since I did that previous video. So I bring a lot more to the table. I have a better sense of what Buick was doing at that time. I'm excited to dig into that with you today. But if you would like to share your vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes only a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. But let's get back to that 3.1 liter V6 under the hood. Well, it was the only engine offered here in the Century at the time. However, in the year 2000, they actually bumped the horsepower from 160 up to 175. This actually gets a different engine code as well because of that year change. And they used this engine all the way until the Century ended in 2005. I like the 3.1 liter. In my previous video, I said it was a weird displacement. It's so strange, but since I've driven many more GMs, it's actually really not. This era of GM engines is pretty good, whether it be the 3.4 or 3.8 liter, especially. The 3.1 liter doesn't really get a whole lot of love, but I still think it's a decently smooth and decent motor overall. Now, like I said, paired to it is a 4-speed automatic. It's still shifting here 23 years later, and I have no qualms about it. Last but not least, this is a W-body platform from GM, meaning it is front-wheel drive, and they're mid-size. So how does it feel to drive a Buick Century from the year 2000? Well, it's very cushy. It's a very comfortable car, and we're going to talk a lot about this in the final thoughts segment, but Buick really wanted to emulate their older cars in the modern era. Now, modern era meaning 1997, but they wanted a classic feel, and I think they really achieved that, especially with the ride quality. It's nice and smooth. There's body roll for days, but that's what I would expect out of a Buick product. Visibility is great, and overall, it's just a really good experience. So with that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 3 gauges and a bunch of warning lights. Off to the left is my anti-lock, oil pressure, and battery voltage light. In the center, I get my coolant temperature, speedometer, and fuel, as well as my digital odometer. And then off to the right, I have my warning lights for the brake, seat belt, and airbag, of which this is giving a low coolant warning. That's a very common issue on these 3100s, that the sensor goes bad, so that is actually not fine. It actually doesn't have an issue at all. On the steering wheel on the left, I have my seek, scan, AM, and FM buttons, and off to the right, I have my source, mute, and volume, which I love the volume knob in this era of Buicks because when you turn it up and down on the steering wheel, the physical knob actually changes too. So very, very cool to see that. Total over-engineering from Buick, but really cool at the same time. The overall steering wheel does feel pretty dated. It's leather wrapped, but it's this sort of gray that I don't really love. Off to the left, I do have my headlight switches, a climate control vent, and a little badge saying Buick Motor Division, in case you thought it was any other Buick. Moving on to the door, we do have the Concert Sound 2 speaker system. This was Buick's upgraded speakers throughout the 1990s. Lock and unlock, power mirrors, power windows, and window locks down below. Moving into the center, we do have this interestingly shaped dashboard. It sort of looks like a wave. But then we do have the radio. This is the factory Buick Century radio, and like I said, you can turn that volume knob with the steering wheel, which I think is cool. Cassette player, CD, pretty much anything you would need in the year 2000. And down below that, we do have our climate controls. I like the digital readout. I like the push button of it. Very clean, very simple. And it does have dual zone climate, so you do get passenger climate, which has this really cool lighting effect that I am kind of obsessed with. That is really, really cool, and just, it feels kind of futuristic-y, but very, very useful here in the Buick Century. Speaking of which, off to the right, we do have a Century Limited badge on the dash. The Limited was the top trim of the Century, so we're going to have all the bells and whistles here in this car. But moving back into the center, underneath the climate controls, we do have our pull-out ashtray and cigarette lighter. And then moving on to the bench seat. It is a bench seat, so you can fit 6 people in here if you really wanted to. And they are really comfy, really cozy, definitely holding on to that older style of Buick, that older style of GM, where they really had a focus on comfy seats. That's no different here in the Century, and a decade after this car came out, you see them move away from these seats. So this was sort of a last hurrah, if you will, for this comfort in a Buick. Now, we do have a center console that folds down that does have cup holders, so we will do a big friggin' bottle test here in the Buick Century from the year 2000, and it is just a smidge too small for the big friggin' bottle. I mean, barely, but if I push any harder, I'm gonna crack a rim. So unfortunately, so close. But the Buick Century from the year 2000 fails the big friggin' bottle test. All right, so we're in the back of the 2000 Buick Century Limited, and you could tell just by looking at the seats shown here, they are incredibly comfortable. It looks like a blow-up playhouse you would get at a birthday party, and I love that about it. However, legroom isn't fantastic. Now, this seat is moved back quite a bit, so, you know, I could adjust that. But overall, it's not bad. Headroom is decent as well. I do get a little center console, nothing found in there. I get a little ashtray down below. But other than that, pretty basic stuff, nothing really to write home about. But here's the back seat of a 2000 Buick Century. So let's hop out, we'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. So as I always mention, I find it funny that in this era, GM was still using 2 different keys. So this black one is for the ignition, this silver one is for the trunk. Pop it up like that. And here we are in the trunk of the Buick Century. Nothing really too crazy. You'll find your spare tire under here, cargo net if you would like, but otherwise, nothing really too crazy to write home about. Here's the trunk. There's some service information if you're curious, but there it is. That's the trunk of a Buick Century. Now we got to talk about the looks, and I've never truly loved the look of this Buick Century. I don't think it's a showstopper. I don't think it's a stunner, but it was designed by Mr. Wayne Cherry, who is, in my humble opinion, the automotive world's second coming. And I love most of his designs. I don't think this is a stellar one, but I do think it's relatively handsome. And the design of this car is actually going to play into my final thoughts as we talk about the Buick Century as a whole. So this is the W body generation of the Buick Century. I actually recently this year drove a Buick Century wagon of that era, and they made that body style from 1982 until 1996, 14 years they made that body style. Essentially, if a kid was born the day they put that car out, he was in high school nearly by the time that concluded. That's a long production run for a car. However, it kept selling. GM couldn't validate a reason to kill it because it kept making them money. And so finally, in 1993, they decided that on the horizon should be a new Century. And so by the 1997 model year, they gave us this. And it was an interesting position that GM was in because they had to make something new, but they couldn't stray too far away from what was working. It's a very hard position to be in as someone who creates. I create these YouTube videos, and it's a fine line that I have to walk in making my new reviews interesting and different and unique without being too monotone and outdated. You have to walk the line of innovation while retaining your identity. It's very, very interesting. However, Buick was able to actually achieve it here with this Century. The designers actually said in multiple interviews and press releases that they didn't want to style this car or give this car any features that would outdate it within a decade. They didn't want this car to be hip or cool or flashy. They wanted it to offer something to Buick buyers that they had become familiar with, just in a new format. So just looking at the design of it, they wanted it to still look good, years down the road. They wanted it to have a very long shelf life, as it's called. And so that's why in here you don't see any crazy digital displays that GM was doing at the time. Take a look at this 1989 Pontiac Grand Prix that I drove. Shout out to Spencer with that car. That was hip and funky and cool, but by 1995 it already looked like a electronic football game. It was outdated very quickly. Well, take a look at the gauges of the Century. Clean, simple, basic. Take a look at the exterior. Take a look at the headlights, the taillights. They're not anything special. They're not anything unique or crazy or in your face, but they last the testament of time. Take a look at old Roman buildings or Greek buildings or any ancient buildings. Take a look at the pyramids. The pyramids are actually a great example. It's one solid shape. There's no overhangs and windows and glass ceilings with chandeliers and driveways. No, they're clean, simple, and basic, and they've stood for thousands and thousands of years. That was Buick's goal with this car. And of course, all cars are going to have some type of expiration date. Of course. For the Honda Civic, we haven't yet found that date. But Buick wanted this car to last, and they didn't want it to be a flash in the pan. They didn't want it to be the hip happening thing that everyone talks about and then never again. So I have to say that they achieved that goal. Heck, a YouTuber is talking about it and making a whole video about it 23 years after its release. Would I be so lucky if people are still talking about this video 23 years down the road? I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Napleton Schaumburg Subaru for letting me take out their Buick Century. This was such a clean example. I was so excited to get behind the wheel. Napleton Schaumburg Subaru is fantastic. I've been working with them for over 2 years now. Really fantastic inventory, great customer service, great sales staff and service staff as well. Can't say enough good things, and they stock vehicles like this. They saw value in something like this, which is fantastic for collectors like myself. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.